There we go. All right, so welcome folks to our program, Philadelphia Community Science Spotlight. Today we'll hear from two fantastic speakers, Wingyi Kung and Chloe Wang, about their community science related programs going on at their institutions. Wingyi's coming from us from John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum, and Chloe's coming from Bartram's Garden. I'm going to go through a couple housekeeping things with Zoom. As you can see right now, we have live captioning going on at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it right now, please look down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and hit the CC button and live captioning. If you have any questions throughout this program, please either put them in the chat below or the Q&A tab below, and I'll be happy to tell them to our speakers at the end of our program. And if you have any tech issues, please put them in the chat as well, and Mike Medea will try and help you out as best he can. So, but you know, I've talked enough right now. Let's get to our speakers. I'm going to introduce them real quick, and then we'll go into some quick flash talks, and then go into general questions. Let's start with our first speaker, Wingyi Kung. She, her, hers. She is a visitor service specialist at John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum, where she fosters new community partnerships and develops engaging environmental programs. She holds a BS in biology from the State University of New York, Binghamton, and a MS in entomology from Pennsylvania State University. She cultivated a love for the complex interdependence of ecosystems in the woods and shores of Maine, New York, Missouri, and Pennsylvania. She has found a home in Philadelphia where she's dedicated to uplifting community and increasing equity in all aspects of life. And then Chloe Wang, she, her, hers, is the River Programs Coordinator at Bartram's Garden, where her role includes leading community science programming, teaching boat building, supporting public boating, and fishing programs, and working on a host of collaborative projects. She also serves on the steering committee of the Alliance for Watershed Education and helps to plan professional development activities for that network. Chloe holds a BS in chemistry from the Haverford College and has participated in research ranging in focus from Gulf of Mexico oil to honeybee health, deep sea microbe mineral interactions, and plastics in the Delaware River watershed. And with that, I will pass this along to Wingyi.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm gonna share my screen because I have some pictures to show you all. All right. So I'm coming from John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum. We are in the Nabe ancestral lands, also known as Nabe-Hogang, and now called Southwest Philadelphia. And if you have never been here, we are right here in Southwest Philadelphia. And like I said, I'm going to give you a little background about John Heinz if you've never been. We now protect Tinicum Marsh, which means marsh or land next to water in the Nabe. And this marsh used to be thousands of acres, used to span Southwest Philadelphia into South Philadelphia, and pre-European colonialization. And the Lenape used this place for hunting, for fishing, and we are still exploring our indigenous roots here. So that's one of the areas that I'm really interested in. So post-European colonization, this land was dammed and started becoming farmland, and it shrank to a few hundred acres from thousands of acres. And eventually in the 1960s, I-95 over here was slated to be built across the last remaining Tinicum Marsh, and the community who have been living here in Delaware County and also in Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia have been using this land for generations. We still get people coming into the refuge today, calling it Tinicum, and telling me about how they used to swim in Cobbs Creek and in Darby Creek. So this was not very long ago. And so because they have this legacy of using this land and feeling stewardship towards it, so they actually lobbied Congress to protect it, and they were successful. So in 1972, John Heinz was designated protected wildlife refuge in perpetuity, which means forever. And so we now protect about 300 acres of tidal marsh, freshwater tidal marsh. So because of our history with the community, we really see ourselves as a community resource. And we really place that in the center of all our programmings. We are part of a huge network of national wildlife refuges, almost 560 different wildlife refuges across the country. But if you go to any one of those, it's going to look pretty different. A lot of them are huge swaths of land that are designated for wildlife. A lot of them are tied to endangered species, and very few people get to visit them. We are kind of the opposite. We are only 1,000 acres total of forested land and tidal marsh. But we have, 1 million people coming to visit us because we are so close to Philadelphia Center. So we really place a lot of focus on outreach, environmental education, and working with our neighbors so that they can see this place as their own, as a place of healing, and also as their backyard lab, where you can see from the side pictures over here, we have some kids getting to enjoy the place and learning about the nature that, they're so close to. So here's the map again, and we are accessible by public transportation. You can take SEPTA or the train. There's a little bit of a walk, but we are working towards making this place more physically accessible. So a little bit more about the refuge. I mentioned that we're 1,000 acres and that we're the largest remaining freshwater tidal marsh in the Delaware River watershed that I'm sure Chloe is going to talk more about. We are a really important bird sanctuary site. We have over 300 different bird species migrating through. Not all these birds stay here and nest, only a few do, actually a fraction of that. But we do have a lot of migrating birds who use this place as an important place to stop and rest and get food before continuing on their journey. And like I said, we get over like 250,000 visitors annually. And this place was established to restore Tinicum Marsh, but also to promote environmental education and let people who live in cities an opportunity to view wildlife. And so I'm actually gonna hop over to our Facebook page. Let's see. And I just wanna show you, we are on Facebook and on Instagram. We go live pretty frequently. So we actually did a live this morning. And you can find us at John Heinz NWR on both Facebook and Instagram. And you can find all our events here. When I was coming up with this presentation, I was thinking like, what community science do we do? And then I realized pretty much everything we do can be considered community science. So you can find our latest events on this page. I keep it updated quarterly. So we're planning our fall events right now, but this coming month we have bird walks. You can come on a wildlife walk with me. We try to make it as easy to jump right in as possible. And we do some Facebook lives, like this one will be a Facebook live. This past year, so many of us went digital, and we really we learned a lot about being online and doing environmental education online. So we're probably going to scale back on the Facebook lives a little bit, but we discovered that we can reach so many new audiences who are on Facebook because of this. And it can be pretty interactive. Nature Tots is a program for kids 3 to 5, and we get to, get them started on exploring nature real early and get them used to being outside and seeing nature everywhere. So something that we really focus on at Heinz is we see nature as everywhere. We don't have any special nature at the refuge. You can find nature in your backyard, places where people don't expect to find nature. Um, we want people to see that you can find ants on the sidewalk, birds, they migrate through, not just through our place, even though, we have a lot of resources for them. They do come through the city too. So we really encourage people to look for nature where they are, and that, yeah, we don't have a special gate towards nature. And so here is some more Facebook Lives, and we have free fishing days so that people can come out and try fishing and see fish up close and personal, and not have to invest in a lot of equipment or licenses. We have some free fishing days because of that. So yeah, so these are all our online events. I'm gonna go back to our so when we think about having nature everywhere, like a lot of people want to identify nature and different wildlife species. I have some recommendations for y'all. There are apps that you can download. So if you don't feel like joining us or, waking up at 7 a.m. to come to the refuge for a bird walk, you can still download Merlin, which is an app from Cornell Lab, and it's really easy to use. You can check out all the different birds that are in the area, and now they have a new feature where you can record bird songs, and they can help you identify what birds that are singing. So Merlin is one, and then another one that I want to highlight is called iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is a website, but you can also download it as an app on your phone. And what happens is you take a picture on your phone, and it will show you the 10 most likely species that it could be, and then you can upload it onto the app, and then fellow naturalists, people who are using the app, can see your picture and can verify it, and tell you there are experts who are on this app all the time who can tell you what species it is, so it's vetted through real people. And then once I think like 3 different people verify it as the same species, it is now research grade. So researchers from different universities and research facilities actually mine this data to figure out population and where different species are moving, and are putting out a lot of cool papers because of it. And so you can participate just by using this app. And if we have 100 people using this app, that's 100 different eyes that one researchers would not be able to get to all these places. So you can discover wildlife where you are while also contributing to science. So this is an awesome app. I highly recommend it. And there is a little video here that I'm gonna skip, but on the iNaturalist app, you can watch a little video to get an idea of how to use it. And every spring, this year it was from April 30th to May 3rd, there is a city nature challenge on iNaturalist. So what happens is that on those dates, we encourage everybody to download iNaturalist and to take pictures in their city, in their backyard, or you can come to John Heinz or Bartram's or anywhere, all the green spaces that you have around you, and just try to identify as many different species around you as possible. And there is a little friendly competition around this. We do compete with other cities as a city of Philadelphia. So we really try to raise awareness around iNaturalist during this time and see if we can outcompete cities from all around the world. It's really cool to see all the different new species that sometimes pop up because we have so many people on the ground using the app, and also to see all the different cities using it. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the chat and we can get more into it. But I do want to talk about some other environmental community science projects that we do. So I was thinking about, identifying species is community science, but another really important community science projects that we do is the cleanup. As we know, Philadelphia has a huge litter problem, and litter doesn't just happen in the streets. Eventually rain, flooding, all that gets washed down into the watershed and into the creek. So every year, before the brush gets too high and it gets too hard to get into the marsh, in April, we have what's called Darby Creek cleanup. So Darby Creek is the waterway that runs through the refuge, and this is a picture that I took of what it looks like every spring. Throughout the year, a lot of litter just accumulates and gets stuck into the marsh. And if they don't get stuck in the marsh, they do eventually wash out into the ocean. Plastic doesn't go anywhere. So we have these huge volunteer cleanups. This is Miss Veronica. I just love this picture of her because she decorated her cleanup gloves so that she could look fabulous wherever. We have some amazing volunteers who come here year after year, spend hundreds of hours here. And you can be one of them if you're listening and you want to join in. We do these cleanups regularly when we are able to. That's usually in the spring and fall when vegetation die back. So you can see here, Wanda, another volunteer, is holding up a huge piece of styrofoam. We get all sorts of things. We have a weird trash contest every year. But this is actually a huge part of land management because plastic is so terrible for our wildlife that if you come participate, you are actually helping us manage for land so that this habitat can be a cleaner, better place for humans and wildlife. And then this is a picture on the left corner here of different volunteers planting native plants in our parking lot area so that we get more pollinators. So this is another way that you can participate. I just had to show more cleanup pictures because well, I was looking through and there were so many. This was we get all sorts of things. You'll be surprised what gets washed down. We get drums, we get appliances, because when water is really high, the force can push down a lot of different things through the marsh and into the ocean. So this is a toy car. We get one every year. And we also get a lot of illegally dumped tires. Our Alliance for Watershed Education Fellow, their capstone this year is actually bringing all these tires back to the city. The sanitation department has a buyback tire roundup program this year. So we are bringing all these tires. We got 300 of them, over 300 of them just from picking up this year. And we're gonna bring them back to the sanitation department. And I got one more thing to highlight before I turn it over to Chloe. So we have what is called snakeheads. So let me show you this. Do you all see this poster? So we have a fish called northern snakeheads. They are an invasive species. They are from another place. They're not native to North America. And because of that, they don't have that many predators here to manage for their population. Their biology also makes them susceptible, makes them more able to overpopulate, and they can get really big and take over areas that are enclosed, like our pond at the refuge. So they can get over 3 feet long, and they eat things like snakes, frogs, other fish. So we try to fish them out. And one of the ways we try to engage the our community in this is to have a snakehead fishing tournament. This is what we were doing this morning. If you're interested, hop on our Facebook and you can see some lives of us trying to fish these snakeheads out. But for this particular program, we invite fisher anglers who already come here to the refuge to fish and educate them about snakeheads and to let them know if they fish and if they get a snakehead to not throw it back in. If they get a snakehead to just fish it out and dispose of it properly. And we have a little tournament to see who can get the biggest snakehead. We ran this several years ago, like 2 years ago before the pandemic, and we had some good participations. As you can see, some of these can get really big, and we are looking forward to engaging more with the community about this issue and to have another snakehead tournament in the future. So like I said, you can look for all our programs online, like our snakehead tournaments, like our cleanups, like our native planting, and our guided walks. So if you have any question, let me know. You'll see me around the refuge too. I run the social media. So if you have any questions, feel free to hop on and direct message me there too. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Wingyi. That was a great talk. Got some great questions too. And then I'll put it over to you, Chloe.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ali, and thanks, Wingyi. I'm going to share my screen. Actually, Wingyi, can you unshare so I can share? All right. So I hope those slides are visible. I'm Chloe Wong, River Programs Coordinator at Bartram's Garden. Bartram's is a historic garden and public park located on Lenape land in Southwest Philadelphia, just down the road from John Heinz. And I'm so happy to be sharing space with Wingyi today, who's a wonderful colleague and friend. And Bartram's has some historical and contemporary connections to the American Philosophical Society as well. So glad to be continuing our connection with the APS today. Thanks so much for having me. So Bartram's Garden is a 50-acre site situated along the Schuylkill River front and hosts the only truly public dock on the tidal portion of the Schuylkill. So just like the park is public space for anyone to enjoy at no cost, the river itself is a public waterway. So anyone has the right to be anywhere on the water, but it's not so easy to find places to access it, especially with any kind of amenities or support. So among many areas of programming at the garden, we have a community boathouse that offers free public boating and fishing programs. These programs are supported by a dedicated crew of volunteers, as well as a cohort of paid local high school interns known as the Dencham River Guardians. Our hallmark public program at the boathouse has been Saturday free boating, which is free kayaking and rowing for whoever shows up on Saturdays from April to October, weather permitting. But weather permitting is not really as simple as it sounds. And in fact, we typically cancel probably a quarter to a third of our program days each season. And the number one reason for these cancellations is combined sewer overflows. Philadelphia has an antiquated combined sewer system that can no longer effectively support the population it serves. So this means that stormwater and municipal sewage travel through the same sewer pipes on their way to a wastewater treatment plant. But when it rains, the sewers often reach capacity. And when this happens, they're designed to just overflow directly into the river. And these are some infographics that the Dencham River Guardians created to illustrate the flow of wastewater into the river through CSOs. As I mentioned, Bartram's Garden borders the tidal Schuylkill, the section of the river between Fairmount Dam and the confluence with the Delaware. 40 combined sewer outfalls empty into this 7-mile section. So CSOs are a really frequent and persistent source of pollution here, where water quality has otherwise greatly improved over the last several decades. And when the boathouse opened in 2015, the program cancellation policy was basically a best guess at what would be protective of boaters' health based on programs in other locations, but we didn't have access to much empirical data on the pollution levels and dynamics of our particular environment, where the tide complicates things with the direction of flow in the river switching 4 times a day. And historically, very little water quality data has been collected here by agencies or research institutions in this tidal section where all of the CSOs are. So we had a lot of questions. Does our cancellation policy make sense? What are levels of harmful microbes actually like? And is there a clear relationship with the weather? And when we started to explore how we might measure this, another question came up of what other water quality variables could potentially help to predict bacteria levels, since bacteria need to be cultured for 24 hours before they can be counted or quantified, which only allows us to say how safe the water was yesterday. So we saw a meaningful opportunity for community science here because there were also already a lot of people in our community who care about these questions. The interns, staff, and cohort of over 100 boathouse volunteers who have strengthened their relationships to the river in running boathouse programs together. And of course, all the folks who come out to those programs and are always super disappointed when we have to cancel. So we decided to start a program. I got some great help from the folks at Stroud Water Research Center who were able to share some of their water quality wisdom and recommend methodologies to investigate the questions we were interested in. So we started with a pilot program in 2018 and then a full season program in 2019 with the high school interns and a self-selected subset of boathouse volunteers. Last year, this in-person programming was limited by the pandemic, but 4 of the intern team leaders did keep up this work with me. And this year we have all 12 interns participating again. So in this program, we measure E. coli levels in river water samples because E. coli is a good indicator organism for fecal pollution in fresh water. And the EPA offers some guidelines for what E. coli levels reasonably support primary contact recreation. Now, primary contact means activity where you're likely to ingest water, like swimming. So these numbers are a little bit conservative for boating, but kayaking is increasingly considered primary contact. And we have many new boaters in our programs, so we always want to account for the risk of falling in the water. We measure E. coli using a product called 3M Petrifilm, which is kind of like a flat, disposable, pre-filled Petri dish that holds 1 milliliter of water. And when incubated in these plates for 24 hours, E. coli colonies grow large enough to count without a microscope. So it's a pretty easy DIY procedure. And in addition to that active data collection, we had a mayfly sensor station installed in 2018 that continuously monitors several water quality parameters, recording readings every 5 minutes and transmitting them to the web. And this is part of a network of these mayfly stations throughout the watershed. We also take some additional measurements using a portable meter, and we have a digital rain gauge to track rainfall right on site. Although I've learned that when you're near the mouth of a river, the weather all the way up to the headwaters is consequential. And we also have colorimeters from this open source company, IO Rodeo, that we use to measure phosphates and nitrates that can also be introduced into the water by sewage. So to share some of our findings and an example of how we visualize data, I'll just show our 2020 E. coli data. So I'm going to switch to a different screen so you can see the interactive plot. So you should all be able to see my cursor now on this screen. So this plot was made in Google Data Studio, which I learned how to use from a colleague at River Network. And Google Data Studio is a really great tool for basic data visualization because it can update live from a Google Sheet where you're entering data. And it can incorporate interactivity, and these plots can be easily embedded on another web page. So on this plot, the brown vertical bars are E. coli levels measured in colony forming units per 100 milliliters of water. And the blue line is rainfall in inches. So the y-axis, you can see, is on a logarithmic scale, meaning the equally spaced markers go up by factors of 10. So you can see that E. coli counts range really widely from 0 all the way up to the thousands. And some of this data illustrates that there's not a totally straightforward relationship between E. coli and rainfall. So for instance, you can see here that there was a huge flood on August 4th, followed by a pretty high E. coli count, as we would expect. But then, let's see if I can move this around. On August 23rd, it rained only like 1/10 of an inch, and the E. coli count the next day was nearly as high as after that big flood. So we've definitely seen elevated bacterial counts in dry weather, and it seems like E. coli levels are least predictable after small amounts of rain, which is when we really have to be deciding whether to cancel our programming. And actually just earlier this week, we ended up taking 2 samples in one day, and the results were wildly different between the morning and the afternoon, which just makes me kind of want to throw up my hands a bit, because the bottom line here is that the CSO issue just needs to be addressed. So I'm going to switch back to my slides. So in addition to evaluating our policies at the boathouse, we've engaged with the policies affecting the river as a whole. 2 years ago, we partnered with River Network and Penn Future to learn about our local policy context and identify ways to leverage our data for advocacy. And we decided to submit our data to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and the Delaware River Basin Commission, the 2 agencies responsible for water quality standards on the tidal Schuylkill, because we need them to raise their standards to better protect water contact activities. So by submitting our data, we wanted to show that people are interacting with the waterway, and we've taken it upon ourselves to do our own assessment of water quality for recreation because they never have. And a lot of people could benefit if they took on some responsibility in addressing the impairment that we're seeing. So I worked with volunteers and interns to prepare a letter to accompany the data submission, which told our story and included a list of specific requests. And this was a highly collaborative process in which individual volunteers worked on different components of the portfolio, and my colleague and I facilitated writing sessions with high school interns. And in crafting this narrative together, the interns were really thoughtful and tactful about what to say and how to say it. And they made a point of expressing appreciation to the agencies before diving into all of the requests and critiques. And one intern likened it to asking his dad for money by leading with a compliment, which I thought was very clever. So we made this submission right before the pandemic hit here, but I've been able to have some follow-up exchange with the agencies, and we've continued to see this work expand in new directions. The intersection of water quality science and policy and access to waterways is getting a lot of attention right now, and people working on larger initiatives are actually coming to us for information because of this very specific expertise we've built in an area where data is scarce, and because we show a really clear example of the need for improvement in water quality. So a priority next step that we're working on at Bartram's is just communicating more publicly about this work. We've had some great opportunities so far for the youth leaders to speak about it, and we're working on getting some accessible data interpretation up on a web page and possibly other interfaces. So just reflecting on our focus of community science today, we've been very intentional in our program to try and model sound principles of community science, and I see us doing this in several ways. One is that we're investigating meaningful place-based questions that respond to the problems motivating our questions. These are questions that meet a real need for information and that participants already care about. And then we're coming full circle by applying the data we collect. So by advocating at the level of governing systems, we're asking for accountability on the part of the entities in power rather than leaving it to community members to clean up the river, because it's bigger than something we can address by ourselves. Thirdly, I try to facilitate this process in ways that are as participatory as possible throughout, getting feedback from everyone involved to shape the program. So it's not just the grunt work of data collection that is a group effort, but also the intellectual work of applying the data and giving input to new iterations of the project. And we always aim to engage young people as full participants who can do the same work as adults and contribute their voices with equal weight. Interns and volunteers in our program all follow the same E. coli testing procedure, and they all contributed to the same letter. There wasn't like a separate youth section that claims to elevate their voices, but ultimately might be taken less seriously. And none of us doing the hands-on work here are credentialed water quality experts, but we are convening different kinds of expertise, drawing on the valuable perspectives, skills, and experience within the group, and aspiring to welcome even more. So I'll stop there for now, and we can take some questions, but I'm sharing my email here too if you'd like to reach out to discuss anything further. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both, Wingyi and Chloe, for these fantastic presentations. Great information. Let's look at some of the questions here. So I think this first one is for Wingyi from our audience. Arnie is asking, who dumps tires into the creek?
Yeah, so we're not sure who, but we can guess that because it's not very easy to recycle tires, and there is actually quite a fee associated with bringing it back, that a lot of businesses who get tires probably don't want to do that. So they find an unmonitored corner of the city and then they just dump it. A lot of times it's close to water, and then when it floods, it just gets washed down. So it's probably multiple people upstream.
So this is a question for both of you, and Chloe, you touched on it in your talk too. So the APS have been thinking about the differences between community science and citizen science. So have your organizations kind of made the certain definitions between those two phrases, community science and citizen science? for whoever wants to.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I would say I use community science because I don't want to imply that you have to be a citizen in order to participate. So I guess I define community science pretty simply as science that's done in a group collectively and by people without like you know expert qualifications in our system of academic science.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I see it too. That you don't need a degree to join in on science, and that all of us participating can actually contribute a lot to science.
Yeah, fantastic. Everyone can engage with science and can take part in it. And that's such an important thing for people to know. We just have another question come in. Chloe, Christy asks, can you say more about responses / interactions with the Basin Commission and DEP, and whether there is a timeline for the recommendations you're making? Christy really appreciates the civic and environmental education work you're doing. Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess after we submitted that data and letter, I had kind of an exchange with an employee at DEP, and we kind of like dove into the information or the assessments that were available on the title Schuylkill, and kind of identified deficiencies. There's really not much up-to-date information, and I actually found like just a straight up mistake that they said they would correct in the next report. So that's just been kind of an ongoing conversation, but there is a larger initiative that's been forming with a few different groups that are coming together to try and work with the DEP to just improve their relationship with outside groups that have data to submit. So trying to help DEP just be more transparent and communicative with community groups who can submit data and make better use of that data. And then I think we also have had a little bit of clarifying work done between DRBC and DEP and sort of like who's responsible for what, where we should be submitting our data. So DRBC has invited us to submit data to them again this year. In terms of a timeline for the recommendations, it would be amazing if it could just get started ever. I think it would be a long road to completing all the asks, but you have to start somewhere. So the first ask is just that they actually do their own assessments for recreation in these areas. And we're not limiting our idea of what can happen in terms of action on these issues to just those agencies. I think it takes a really multi-pronged approach to kind of find movement, and there are other initiatives that are working on this stuff right now too.
Great, thanks. For Wingyi, we have a question. Have access and marketing been barriers in the past to get folks to John Heinz to do this work that you've been talking about, the events? And has the switch to virtual increased some of that engagement and access?
So access and marketing? Yeah, so we found that our Facebook audience is, mostly older, and we have gotten a lot more engagement from that group. Some people might not have the ability to come to the Refuge. So I feel like we're getting a lot of people from all across the country tuning in from that. But in terms of doing more local outreach, we've known this for a long time that, you know, not everybody is on Facebook, not everybody's on Instagram, and that for our local community of Southwest Philadelphia, flyering, word of mouth, it goes a long way. So sometimes when we want to get more of our neighbors to come, I will just stand in front of ShopRite and pass out flyers and talk to people directly. And we found that to be pretty effective. We also partner with our neighborhood group, Eastwick Friends and Neighbors, and they go to door, and that has really helped out with those partnerships.
Great, fantastic, yeah. You mentioned as well with iNaturalist, do people at John Heinz check iNaturalist to see what like the public is doing on just a daily basis, what they're marking throughout the refuge?
Yeah, I don't actually. We have a biological technician who monitors a little bit, but if something interesting is happening, we often get a call, we get a message on Facebook telling us to check this thing out. So we do have some communication and established communication through Facebook and social media, and also just the network of volunteers who have come here for decades. They know how to reach us and they always let us know if something is going on.
Yeah, fantastic. Chloe, this next question is for you. So you mentioned consistent and same practices for your volunteers. How essential or difficult is it to balance community science with some of the rigors of like scientific practice collection?
Well, I think we have, you know, some quality control and quality assurance measures in place. We look to protocols that have been established by other organizations doing similar studies. So, you know, we always run a procedural blank alongside our bacterial samples, and we run those samples in triplicate and take an average of the results so we can kind of identify outliers and just get sort of a better statistical result. So, you know, it's always going to be somewhat limited, but we actually have an exciting project going on that's a collaboration with 3 other sites on the Schuylkill, kind of running from the headwaters at Berks Nature around Reading down to where we are. And with that project, we're sort of assessing our DIY method by doing coordinated data collection, where every time we sample, we send a duplicate sample to an external lab where they do sort of a more sophisticated assessment, and we can compare that to our own results to see, you know, how accurate and precise is our own method. So, so far that's been somewhat promising. But yeah, it is kind of a trade-off always between, you know, how seriously is DEP going to take our data based on what kind of sampling plan we're using versus, you know, how involved can the participants be? Because often, like, getting a higher tier of data involves just sending the sample off to an outside lab. So that loses some of the kind of educational and engagement piece that is actually really important to us.
Thank you. Our next question coming in is, are there many community level data collection efforts in Philadelphia? If so, would there be a benefit to working collaboratively? And this is from Dave McCullough. He says, thank you both for your leadership. This is inspiring work.
Well, maybe we can both speak to this in terms of what we're aware of. I mean, working in like the water quality area, I feel like on the Schuylkill, I'm not aware of a lot of other data collection going on, especially in our area. we do have that project happening that I just mentioned with the other sites further up the Schuylkill. And so I'm really excited about that being collaborative because with, you know, we're all sampling on the same days, and it'll help us to kind of form a more complete picture and tell a story, a clear story to the public about, you know, the safety and health of the river all the way along. And then I know there are some groups that are interested in starting up programs similar to ours. So I'm certainly in conversation with them as they're planning for those programs.
Yeah, I mean, besides iNaturalist, I'm not aware of too many other initiatives to get the community engaged in science. Another website that many people use is eBirds, which is bird focus. So that's another way that community scientists who are interested in what kind of birds are coming through, they can look on this database. And a lot of birders use it to find their next rare bird. So that's just I think the only other example that I can think of.
Great. Thank you both for answering that one. So Christy in the chat said she appreciates the senior environmental corps, seniors who water test in the Wissahickon. She actually dropped a link in there too.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I know there are other groups that do some water testing on different tributaries and have sort of thought about connecting with them before. So it's a good idea.
Thanks. So I think that might have been our last question for now. So I would like to thank you both, Chloe and Wingyi, for presenting today with all this wonderful information. I'd like also thank John Heinz and Bartram's Garden for partnering with us today. If anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to email me afterwards at museumeducation@amphilsoc.org, and I will be happy to pass them along to Chloe and Wingyi. And Mike Medea, our head of education, has put that in the chat. Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. And I want to thank you all again for joining us. And I would say that's about it. We are putting this recording up online, and we'll be sure to send an email out to everyone who has signed up to let them know when it is actually live. So thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Chloe and Wingyi, again. It was fantastic. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.